Let's look to the Times, the front page of the Times. The headline reads, French right humiliates Macron. Marine Le Pen, populists within touching distance of power after reducing our president's party to third place. Ava, was this a huge mistake from Macron? After the EU elections, he decided to call that snap election for government, saying, well, look, because the French far right did so well in the EU elections, he said, well, if that's how you really feel, let's have a proper election. And it seems like the French public have said, yep, that's how we really feel.
I mean, it was rather ambitious. It was a massive gamble. It sort of has the hallmarks politically, not in terms of the forces, but in terms of the decision making of the 2017 election that we had here, called by Theresa May, where I think, she believed that she was going to recoup a whole number of seats up and down the country, and actually it went catastrophically in the opposite direction, and so Macron is now feeling the wrath of that. But, we've got, they've got another round of voting on July 7th, and it's thought that...
next Sunday, yeah.
Yes, and so it's thought that they'll have, the rest of the parties will group together and form a coalition that will knock them out of place.
Well, there's already a sort of a left-wing coalition, Jeff. That managed to get 29%. It's a coalition that involves sort of some extreme left-wing parties, the Communist Party, sort of socialist parties. They've all come together. They got 29% yesterday. The far right got 33%. Macron's party at 22%. But it still doesn't bode well for the French president. We should explain that he has still got 3 years to run in his presidency. And it is a bit like the American system, where you can have a president from one side of the political fence having to work with the government on completely the opposite side. Macron can't stand again, but this could be, of course, Marine Le Pen's chance to not only form a government, but also to set her eyes onto the presidency in 3 years' time.
Yeah, I think snap election is one of those things that you have the idea and you say, let's not do that. Like hosting let's have Christmas at ours this year. Let's not do that. Should we have a snap election? Let's not do that. I mean, it's interesting because, I wouldn't class myself as an expert on French politics at all. It's interesting that a moderate paper like The Times have said French right rather than far right. Obviously, National Rally's argument is that they've changed from the party of old. I'm sure none of us here know enough about their policies to claim that we would understand the distinctions between those things. But most people perceive them as far right, I think. And the gamble that I worry about is, when you read in the history books, is what... You always say, well, they let Hitler out early. You know those things where somebody took a gamble and said, well, let's bring in the disinfectant of sunlight, and then 10 years from now, President Le Pen is setting up to serve a second term. It just feels like one of those historical gambles that could end up looking like a huge mistake.
But you were saying that when we were talking in the break, that this is also driven, this vote for Marine Le Pen's party is also driven by a lot of younger people in France who are concerned with things like immigration, for example. Yeah,
and it's interesting that they are concerned with immigration, because typically people who are under 35 are very, pro-multiculturalism. They tend to be very pro-immigration. But actually what's been happening over the last year or so in France in reaction to, wage stagnation, poor housing, just a general sort of feeling of discontent with the way that way life is for younger people, their sights has almost turned onto immigration. And I worry about that happening here, because Nigel Farage has spotted a gap in the market here. Neither of our two main political parties speak to the under 35s. And he has spotted that, and he's found that niche. And he is actually aiming a lot of his policies towards the under 35s. And, I worry that there's only so much good grace that younger people will have before it turns nasty.
But isn't it yet again another vote for change? People are not happy with all that you mentioned, the services not being up to the standard that it should be, wage stagnation, concerns about immigration, and they just want to get whoever's in charge in there now out and try something different. Can we not see that as a sort of a vote for change? And I don't mean to use the sort of the Labour phrase at the
Yeah,
moment.
no, break the
Protest
consensus.
Yeah, maybe.
I think Ava makes a really good point. In the two leaders' debates, in both of them, the leaders were asked, what have you got for young people? And Sunak and Starmer both flailed around. They literally didn't have a specific policy or answer. Sunak probably more so. And I think that, if you're saying to people, you're unlikely to have a mortgage, own your own property, you're going to earn less. In the same, people feel like disrupting whatever that consensus is. If it doesn't set to furnish you with a good life, you can look. I wouldn't vote in that way, but you can understand why people might roll the dice.